Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. This is session number 15 of Peoples of Middle-earth. And tonight, we're gonna return to the best appendix that you won't find in The Return of the King, the authorized version of Appendix B, The Tale of Years, the non-Second Age portion. I am hoping to spend some more... No, I am planning. Indeed, I am determined to spend some more time tonight looking at and discussing what I love about this appendix. And it seems to me such a... I don't know, such a representative irony, right? That the one appendix that seemed to really want to be what it was, right? Like, really written to be an appendix, really doing a marvelous job in relating to the text that it is an appendix of, got all chopped up and shifted and crushed down. Well, anyway, it is certainly true that watching Tolkien struggle with the appendices has been painful. I can only imagine how painful it must have been for Christopher at the time, right? When Tolkien was trying to work toward the publication, and, that whole span of time, when instead of being able to celebrate, the publication of the Fellowship of the Ring, he was having to constantly wrestle with these struggles, these peculiar struggles that we have seen him having, certainly not to fill out material, and not even just to, it's not even fair to say to cut it down, because it's not just a matter of shortening the thing, but of totally changing the project. Anyway, it's difficult. It's painful to watch in some ways, and especially this one. But I am just so glad that Christopher gave us this, because now we know where to look for the authorized version of Appendix B. It's going to be hard for me ever to make myself read Appendix B, like the published Appendix B again, right? Why when we have this, right? Now, I know it's hard because he actually changes some things. As we were seeing, Smeagol is still, at least I think we're seeing that. No, maybe we didn't yet. Maybe we didn't get there yet. Okay, never mind. We'll get there. He changes Gollum's age again. You will recall in the earlier draft, he still was thinking that Smeagol was several thousand years old, right? That Smeagol had found, like, that, Diegol finds the ring very, very soon after Isildur loses it, which, if you think about it, is an interesting question. That is, his deliberate... I wonder... Yeah. Well, anyway, it's interesting to see him weighing the two things, right? On the one hand, to have the ring fall into the river and it be discovered again soon thereafter, raises fewer difficulties than somebody fishing in the river and seeing the glint of gold, on the bed of the river thousands of years after Isildur loses it. So you've got those difficulties weighed against the difficulties of Smeagol being 2,000 years old, right? And it's interesting to me that he chooses the way that he does. Anyway, we will see. We will look at that more, a little bit more at least, as we go through. But let's before we jump into the text, though, I wanted to talk about something. I was talking about this at Exploring the Lord of the Rings last night because I had a big idea this past weekend, and it has an interesting applicability to the Mythgard Academy. I mean, it has applicability to exploring the Lord of the Rings, which is why I was talking about it there too. But it has an intriguing, different applicability, or sort of, in a sense, more advanced applicability to the Mythgard Academy. And that is, I was talking with Rob Goslin, the director of our space program, and we were realizing that something that would be like he has set up sort of an area within BlackBerry, our software that we use to run the space program. He set up an area there to be able to do custom classes for like separate organizations and things. This is something we've already done. Like a group of people comes to us and says, hey, we want to do this class. Can you help us organize it? We're like, yeah, we can totally help you organize that. We had one with a church group and another group. So it's really cool. Anyway, so we had this all set up, and we were talking about it and realized there's a real potential here that I can't believe that I'd never thought of before. One of the things that people have been wishing for a long time, this has come up in many conversations I've had with people at Moots, who are listening to my broadcasts of various kinds, and that is like that they're not able to contribute if they can't make it live, or there's no chance to discuss. Listening to them asynchronously is fun, but it'd be fun to be able to do discussion. And Rob and I were realizing we could easily actually make that happen. We could organize discussion groups for people who want to have discussion groups for my broadcast. So again, as I said, I was talking to the Exploring the Lord of the Rings people. We could do Exploring the Lord of the Rings discussions like once a month, maybe twice a month. For people to be able to kind of continue discussions and develop their own ideas and respond to things and stuff. Just because I'm not ever able to get to everything. And of course, people don't get a chance to, sort of say their own ideas and give their own reactions and things. But of course, it occurs to me that with Mythgard Academy, we could do this too. We could do a discussion group for Mythgard Academy. But not only is there the possibility of our being able to do a discussion group for Mythgard Academy contemporaneous with the live broadcasts, right? So that as we're going through books together, we could supplement that with meetings where folks could get together in small groups with a discussion leader from our Signum staff, who would would then be able to continue conversations and to discuss things. And I think that would be really, really fun. But of course, with the Mythgard Academy, there's also the chance of doing more or doing other things. That is to say, the discussion groups don't have to be on the current book, right? We could set up discussion books on old books that we have talked about, like on previously recorded segments from the Mythgard Academy over the last 13 or 14 years. Like Dracula, for instance. Yeah, so people who weren't around for the original discussion could listen to the recordings and then have a group to discuss them together. So yes, we could get a group who says like, hey, you want to go through and read Dracula together and, listen to the Mythgard Academy recordings and then have discussions? We can do that. We could do that with, again, any of the things that we've done. And of course, soon now, we are approaching ever nearer over these next couple months to finishing the history of Middle-earth. And so, of course, it's now possible that people could go through and say, hey, let's read the entire history of Middle-earth together with, accompanied by this series and have discussions. Anyway, this is something. It's a new idea. I'm almost embarrassed to say it's a new idea because it's an idea I feel like I should have had years ago. But it is a new idea, and it would be easy to arrange. The discussion groups, we'd have to charge a little bit for them because I have to pay some people to set them up, and because we'd be doing not only organizing the thing, we'd be scheduling people so that we'd be making sure to appoint it. We wouldn't just be naming a time and say hope you can make it to that time. We would be using our normal systems in BlackBerry to get people's time zones and availabilities and cross-reference all of those, and then therefore be suggesting some times that the whole group could meet at. We've got some people who are really good at that kind of thing, because we'd want them to be small group discussions. That's Signum's style. That, by the way, I can tell you for free, is the secret to doing good synchronous online education. This is what everybody was doing wrong in the pandemic. They were trying to get 30 people in a class, and it doesn't work. I can tell you, one of the secrets to doing successful online classes, as we've always done at Signum, is small class size. Jackie, Till We Have Faces class would be so much fun. Anyway, so as I said, I'd have to pay some of the staff to be doing. So we'd be organizing the classes, we'd be scheduling them, we'd be using our Zoom licenses and getting the links to everybody. So we'd be doing all that coordinating, and then, as I say, I would want to bring in one of my Signum staff to help to lead the discussion, just to facilitate, basically. Make sure everybody could get engaged with that. Anyway, so that's, but it wouldn't cost much. I'm thinking something in the ballpark of like $20 a session, I think. So if we did like one session a month, it would be like $20 a month per person. If it were two sessions a month, it'd be $40 a month per person. It's not very much money, but I think with that we can make it work. But I think it'd be really, really cool. So we're kind of still sorting this out. I'm going to try to see if we can pilot it a little bit with Exploring the Lord of the Rings. And just we'll try to kind of iron out the kinks of it. Mythgard Academy is a slightly more complicated prospect because it's not just like one thing. It's a wide array of things. And so if it's too diffuse, right? I mean, if we have 60 people interested and they all want to do, like 14 different things, it's going to be maybe hard to balance. But anyway, that's what I'm, as I say, the logistics are more complicated with the Mythgard Academy stuff, but I think it would be really, really cool. So I will be circulating soon. I have an interest form that I was circulating in Exploring the Lord of the Rings last night for people who are interested in that, so that we can get that information and keep in touch with folks who are interested in that to let them know when we're thinking of beginning that and starting that up. And yes, Maureen, it's true that finding our preceptors, our discussion leaders for those would be a little bit more complicated for Mythgard Academy, right? It's a little easier to find people that I can throw into a Lord of the Rings discussion without too much notice. It's a little harder to be, tap somebody on the shoulder and be like, hey, you're leading the Boethius discussion next week. Go to town, right? Like we'd have people who would definitely be able to do it. But as you say, the logistics are a little bit more complicated in that way. So I'm not quite ready to move forward with this yet, but I wanted to let you know. So Jocelyn, when I say $20 per meeting, there doesn't have to be one meeting per session necessarily. It would be very possible to decide, like basically the class could decide for the books, for Mythgard Academy books, the class could decide on a pace. That if they wanted to go through, taking the Mallory example, right? It was 36 sessions, right? So maybe you decide to do Mallory in 6 months, and you have one meeting a month for 6 months, or 2 meetings a month for 6 months, or something like that. You would not. It would not necessarily. It's not like locked to be one meeting per session. Though again, people could do that if they wanted to. I mean, there would be some flexibility there, for what the folks involved were interested in and all that kind of thing. Yeah, anyway. So I guess I say the whole thing is designed to be informal, right? I mean, this is not a course, right? There's no requirements here. It would just be the opportunity for people, because I know that many people, many people will get more out of the books and the book discussions if they have the chance to sit and discuss together as well. Anyway. 80 Proto on YouTube says it's cheaper than therapy, which is true. So there you go. But yeah. So I'll keep you posted. I'll keep you posted on this idea as it develops. I just wanted to let you know that it's something that I was thinking about, so you can be thinking about it yourself. We will see. We will see how things develop there. Yeah, Maureen, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. People watching the sessions on their own first, and then meeting them after. So again, you could maybe watch 2 or 3 sessions, right? Or more, and then have a meeting to kind of discuss like the first chunk or whatever like that. Yeah. So, yes. And Jocelyn, I know you've been meeting with a group of friends, basically doing this in your in-person meetings out there in California. I was thinking of you right away after I had this idea. I'm like, it's just like what Jocelyn was doing. And by the way, Jocelyn, I am hoping, it is my hope to be able to stop by SoCal Moot this year. I'm hoping to be able to I would love to be able to come to one of your meetings if we could, but we'll see. We'll see how the schedules work out there, but it'd be cool. Anyway, so as I say, well, I just wanted to share this idea with you. I will come back to you with more, as I say. But in the meantime, let's get back to Appendix B. All right. We get to Shire Reckoning 1. We got about halfway through the third age in the authorized version last time. Jocelyn, I do have my needed history of our Mythgard class. Unfortunately, I can't reach it. It's across the room, or I'd hold it up right now. It's awesome. Okay, Shire Reckoning 1. Here we go. A host of Perianath migrates from Bree westward and crosses the Brandywine. The land beyond, between Baranduin and Emyn Baraid, had been a domain of the kings of Arnor, when they had both chases and rich farms, but they were now untended and falling into wilderness. The king Argaleb II, therefore, allowed the Perianath to settle there, for they were good husbandmen. They became his subjects in name, but were virtually independent, and ruled by their own chieftains. Their numbers were swelled by stores that came up from southern Eriador, and entered the land from the south, and dwelt mostly near to the Baranduin. This land the Perianath or halflings called the Shire. Shire Reckoning begins with the crossing of the Baranduin in this year. Now, I remember, we read this at the end of last time. I wanted to read it again because I wanted to begin by asking the question which I did not get to complete in my rushed finishing last week. And that is, from whose perspective is this being written? It is like, who's speaking here? It doesn't seem to me to be our modern historian, because he didn't call hobbits the Perianath. That seems to be a Gondor thing. I mean, that's certainly where we encounter it in The Lord of the Rings, right? So, from a host of Perianath migrates from Bree westward. And the fact that they're using Baranduin persistently, right? They tell us that it's the Brandywine, in parentheses, the first time. But they use the Baranduin all the way through the whole rest of the section, right? And if we look at the very end, this land, the Perianath or halflings, so they're giving a translation of Perianath, called, quote, the Shire. This is a very different perspective. Yeah, he didn't say Holbitle either, so he's not a Rohirric historian, yes. This strikes me as particularly interesting. Like that, it was here that this question really struck me. I wasn't really noticing it particularly in the appendix up to this point. But here, again, it really stands out. Stands out not only because it's different from the Hobbit frame that most of the rest of the text is in. Like neither the Hobbit frame, which is sort of the immediate frame of the text, nor the modern historian frame, which is the larger frame of the text from the prologue and the initial appendix. If it is Gondorian, which it sounds like, right? Like it's Findegil King's writer, Adam, or similar, right? If it is, how does it fit? Because this is a rather particular viewpoint to take, right? It's a very striking choice. I mean, it's not a weird choice. Like we already did get Findegil King's writer, right? So in the prologue, so we know that the prologue introduced the concept of the later Gondorian emendations on the copy of the Red Book of Westmarch, right? That was brought down to Gondor. So we know that existed, and that was the ultimate source. That's the provenance of the text that came to our modern scholar. So again, it's not like it's out of completely left field that we would get a Gondorian perspective. But he's not been doing that. He's not been showing that in any of his appendix work to this point. It didn't seem to be being told from a Gondorian point of view. So I suspect, therefore, that what this means is that he is meaning to place this text, the appendix, the authorized version of Appendix B, from within a particular point in the textual history of the narrative, not in the Shire, but in Gondor afterwards, which is perfect and would help to explain why this is such a good appendix. Because what he was undertaking to write here is not just extra material, but an actual appendix, something actually appended to the Red Book by the Gondorians. Like it's an appendix within the frame, right? This is, in a sense, not part of the Red Book of Perianath. This is an appendix to the Red Book of Perianath that was written in Gondor afterwards and added to it. And that's why that could help explain why it's such a good appendix. Because unlike most of the other things that he was writing, he really kind of sat down and is like, okay, and my creative project for today is an appendix, right? David Michael, by having this be part of an in-universe historical scholarly apparatus rather than the modern scholar, it restricts it a little bit. It becomes, Adam, exactly, it becomes a Gondorian fragment from the Red Book of Westmarch, or attached to the Thane's book. And that helps to not only define more clearly its scope so that it's not, you'll notice it hasn't been growing out of control. There was the one place where the momentum kind of halted when he did the whole coming of the Istari, right, in year 1000, circa year 1000. That was a little long, but even it was only 3 paragraphs, right? This is not like becoming pages and pages and pages of narrative as we were seeing some of the Numenor stuff threatening to become, right? By establishing this within the historical frame, within the textual frame, it places bounds on it. It defines more clearly the relationship between this narrative that he's writing and the narrative of the Lord of the Rings. And I think it's that is the thing that seems to me to be very likely a big part of the explanation for why this as a text in itself is so much more successful. I say successful not because I'm trying to nitpick at Tolkien but again, the other stuff was like not fitting. It wasn't staying what it was supposed to be. It was starting off as a little appendix, and then it was growing and growing and becoming something of its own. We were watching this with the Númenórean stuff, right? It wanted to grow up to be, its own little, like, Quenta Silmarillion Part 2, The Years of Númenor, right? But it wasn't allowed to grow into that. And as a result, there was no clear path forward. It was very difficult. It was very painful. Here, the relationship between this text and the original text is like, so if this is Gondorian, as this certainly suggests, then this becomes a Gondorian synopsis and commentary that we are seeing here. This is one of the most, we've seen Tolkien write entries, little notes about the founding of the Shire, right? About, we've seen this in other chronologies. We've seen this sort of thing come up. And yet here we get this from a quite different perspective. We were never told why King Argaleb II chose to allow the settling of the Shire by the hobbits. Because the lands were now untended and falling into wilderness, and the Perianath were good husbandmen. This land, the Perianath are halflings called the Shire. Again, just like that sentence, that is not the point of view that we are used to seeing. Almost every reference to the founding of the Shire that we've ever read has been written from hobbits' perspectives, or at least from the modern scholar who was writing in like the anthropological tone that he adopts in the prologue, right, in the Concerning Hobbits section. He was short on farmers, Adam, so he brought in a bunch of short farmers, is what you're suggesting. I guess that worked out. Okay, sure. Even the Shire Reckoning, in the context, Shire Reckoning begins with the crossing of the Baranduin in this year. The use of the word Baranduin instead of Brandywine, the way it follows that sentence which is describing the Perianath or halflings as if they were strange creatures, makes Shire Reckoning begins with the crossing of the Baranduin sound peculiar. Notice, by the way, it's not even quite right. They normally call it the Shire Reckoning. Just like Radagast didn't get the definite article right when he said that, the uncouth name of Shire. David Michael, as you were recalling, our narrator in the authorized version of Appendix B does almost the same thing there. Shire Reckoning begins with the crossing of the Baranduin in this year. Yeah. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward. We're moving into the the more proximate half of the Third Age, right, as we will get up to and including the description of the events of the Great War, and the War of the Ring and the Quest of the Ring and all that stuff as well. Having noted this point of view, let's see how that is treated, right? Let's see how that's treated and what Tolkien's doing with it, and therefore with this text. Because it's going to come to a point where what he's doing is giving a synopsis of the book itself, right? Of the Lord of the Rings itself. And why do that? Isn't it weird to do that? How does he handle that? And I think that we can see that he's starting to work up to that, right? Okay. 2060. The fear of the ringwraiths, or Ulairi, spreads far and wide. The elves deem that the power in Dol Guldur is one of these, but in the hearts of Elrond and Gandalf, the fear grows that the darkness in Mirkwood should prove to be the shadow of Sauron himself awakening. 2063. Gandalf goes alone to Dol Guldur in secret to discover the truth concerning the sorcerer. This is familiar, right? Right? But the sorcerer is aware of him, and being not yet grown to great power, he fears the eyes of Gandalf and the strength of the wise, and he deserts Dol Guldur and hides in the east again for a while. Here begins a time that is called the Watchful Peace, for there was a long quiet, but no certainty. During that time, the ringwraiths never again appeared in visible shape beyond the walls of Minas Morgul, but the wise were in doubt what should yet come to pass, and Gandalf made great journeys to discover the plans and devices of their enemies. All right. Now, one thing that is also clear is that I've mispronounced. It's Ulairi is one of the words that I mispronounce. He puts the accent. I believe he wants me to stress the first syllable, Ulairi. I find that difficult to do. But yes, the Ulairi. That's it. It is on my list of words I've always mispronounced and have a difficult time not doing anymore. But yes, that is Quenya. Yes, we did have a definition of the wise before this. Yes, that was just a little bit ago in the authorized version here, which is helpful. But note that do we know this story? Gandalf goes alone to Dol Guldur in secret. Does he get the map from Thran? The map and key at this time? Look at the year. This is happening in 2063. So, yeah, it sounds familiar, but it isn't familiar. This is not Gandalf's trip to Dol Guldur, where he's going to find Thran and get the map and key and discover that this is... Yeah, David Michael says, I had to think if it was the Shire Reckoning years. Yeah, exactly. I did a double tick reading through this when I was doing the slides. And I was like, wait, what? But no, this is a second time. He is duplicating Gandalf's trips to Gandalf is now taking 2 trips to Dol Guldur in secret. He's going to infiltrate Dol Guldur twice. This first time, Sauron just flees from him to avoid discovery. He doesn't want Gandalf to figure out that he is in fact Sauron the Great returned. or Sauron the less great than he would really quite like to be at this point. So, no. This is a totally unrelated, other than being parallel, to the one that we know. This is almost 1,000 years early. Well, not 1,000 years. 800 and change years. But it's centuries before the visit that we probably all thought of first. If you just start reading Gandalf goes alone to Dol Guldur in secret to discover the truth, and we're like, yeah, we know that story. Except we don't know that story. This is different. And look at how he is treating Gandalf. Tolkien, I mean. First of all, isn't it interesting that he's called Gandalf? You might think Mr. the Perianath went into the land might be calling him Mithrandir, but he's not. He's calling him Gandalf. Perhaps that means that the Gondorian scribe, the Gondorian scholar who is writing this appendix, is deliberately using Gandalf's Hobbit name, because they would know that the Perianath call him Gandalf, right? I'm not sure what to do with that fact. It could be, David Michael, it could be a lapse on Tolkien's part, an inconsistency. That is saying him imperfectly carrying on the frame of the Gondorian narrator all the way through. But Jackie, we're not completely sure. Maybe this is evidence that it's not a Gondorian. And we were wrong. We'd have to be able to have another explanation for the whole Perianath story. It could be an elf. Jackie, it's possible. This could be written out of Rivendell. They might call him Gandalf. It's possible. I'm doubtful, Adam. It is possible that it's like the modern scholar. But it doesn't sound like the modern scholar. The Periana thing is weird. Would be weird for the modern scholar. I guess compared to the, Mr. Concerning Hobbits to suddenly, Periana thing them at this point. Could be Rivendell. Yeah. Several of you were delighting in the indeed delightful irony of the sorcerer fearing the eyes of Gandalf. That for all of the, focus on the eye of Sauron later on, Sauron himself was scuttling away in nervousness before the eyes of Gandalf earlier on. It puts things into a really interesting perspective, right? When you think about Gandalf, even Gandalf 2.0, even Gandalf the White at the end, right? He's not able to go toe-to-toe with Sauron. Even he, I think, is not able to go toe-to-toe with Sauron. And yet here, Gandalf is plenty old enough to remember the day. A day which he no doubt looks back on with some chagrin later on, when Sauron was afraid of him and of the rest of the wise. It doesn't say, of course, that Gandalf could have taken him single-handedly here. He feared, that is, Sauron feared, the eyes of Gandalf and the strength of the wise, not just the strength of Gandalf. But still. There is plainly a sense of Gandalf having the upper hand. And by adding first in this case, right, by adding this other trip to Dol Guldur, he creates this interesting parallel, right? The first time Gandalf comes to Dol Guldur and Sauron is in danger because Gandalf has come, and so he avoids him and escapes. The second time Gandalf comes to Dol Guldur, Gandalf is in danger. And he goes and infiltrates Dol Guldur at great risk to his own life and safety. And that, of course, is an excellent measure of the growth and regrowth of Sauron's power. But this also shows us a lot about Gandalf. Remember Saruman's words? Going about the lands and concerning himself in every business, whether it belongs to him or not. Right? When we read the authorized version of Appendix B, it's a fair cop, right? I mean, Gandalf, yes, is kind of... I mean, look at that. Gandalf made great journeys to discover the plans and devices of their enemies. Yeah. Going about the lands and concerning himself in every business, whether it belongs to him or not. That's almost a paraphrase, right? But again, thinking in the terms that we were discussing when we were talking about that passage in Exploring the Lord of the Rings, it is very clear, and I think it's important for what is being done in this appendix, that Gandalf is doing the work. Gandalf is doing the work of the White Wizard. He's already doing it. He is... Gandalf says at the end of The Lord of the Rings, right, to the hobbits, he says, I was the enemy of Sauron. And you can see that he has been the prime mover of the enemies of the prime mover of the enemies of Sauron from the start. It's Gandalf who does this. Saruman is nowhere around here. Gandalf is doing all of this stuff. All the wise are doing is being strong, admittedly, collectively, but also being in doubt of what should yet come to pass. Which sounds like it might be a good reason to get off your butt and go about and make some great journeys already to try to figure it out, what's yet going to come to pass, right? Like Gandalf is going to do. Yeah, Jackie, it does sound like elves, especially as Tolkien described elves, remember? Post-First Age elves, right? Doing no great works, making no new marvels, right? Yeah, they're doing a whole bunch of nothing, just trying to maintain the norm. Yes, exactly. And Gandalf, he's moving around. He's doing stuff. 2463. The White Council is formed to unite and direct the forces of the West in resistance to the Shadow. Curanir, or Saruman the White, is chosen to be the head of the council, since he has studied all the arts and ways of Sauron and his servants most deeply. Galadriel of Lorien wishes Gandalf to be made chief, but he refuses. Saruman begins his study of the Rings of Power and their uses and history. This version of Appendix B does a better job of explaining, of demonstrating why Galadriel wants Gandalf to be the leader of the council. Better than anywhere else. Like, when that gets mentioned, when that is alluded to in the narrative, right, that Galadriel wished that Gandalf had been the head of the White Council, we have no real clue as to why. I mean, okay, We know that Gandalf is awesome, and so therefore, and Galadriel is apparently sufficiently awesome to perceive that, right? So, like, and of course, also by that time, Saruman has turned traitor. So, in retrospect, she was proven right. So, it's not like I'm saying it's like crazy talk that she's doing this, but again, almost every other discussion of the Astari just calls Saruman the head of their order. Like, it seems pretty clear that Saruman is number one and Gandalf is number two. That Saruman is the greatest and most powerful of all of the wizards. That seems to be a premise that even Gandalf seems to accept. Gandalf calls Saruman the greatest of his order in the Fellowship of the Ring, long before we're told that Galadriel had wanted Gandalf for the job of White Wizard. And so, but here, this version of the story in the Authorized Appendix B is a much clearer version of that. So we did not get that. We did not get that. We got them both arriving. They were the two named ones, right? So it was clear that they were both important. But it was not made clear from the beginning there that Saruman was definitely number one and Gandalf was definitely number two. And every reference to Gandalf that we've gotten, in particular what we just got, look at Gandalf's leadership. Look at Gandalf's initiative. This whole story here, the story of the beginning of the Watchful Peace, starts with Gandalf and Elrond sharing together their fear that the darkness in Mirkwood should prove to be the shadow of Sauron himself awakening. Elrond and Gandalf are the two that have this premonition. No reference to Saruman or Galadriel either, for that matter. And then Gandalf takes the initiative. And Sauron flees Gandalf. And then during the Watchful Peace, who's doing what? Gandalf's doing all the stuff, right? So after this preamble, after the new first visit to Dol Guldur, which we had not gotten any clues of before in the text, now it seems totally intuitive, right? I'm like, yeah, Galadriel, clearly. Let's put the go-getter in charge. Let's take the one that, Shadow in Mirkwood was fleeing from. Maybe that'll be good. And what is the reasoning behind choosing Saruman? That again was never explained in the text. Galadriel says, what is it she says? If my counsels had not gone amiss, it would have been Gandalf and not Saruman. How did her counsels go amiss? Like, what happened to her counsels? What other counsel overcame hers? What was the counter-argument? We never even hear. Other than, again, just the sense that Saruman is the greatest of their order. So, obviously, that Galadriel was backing the underdog, and in the end, didn't have a strong enough argument to induce the council to do the unexpected appointment. But here, it's entirely intuitive, Galadriel's, and again, and there's no indication that Cornir is superior. But why is he chosen? We are told why he's chosen. Since he has studied all the arts and ways of Sauron and his servants most deeply. Because he knows Sauron and his arts. And the arts of his servants. Remember that this is still there. Like Tolkien is building here on a seed that is present in the story. remember, why does Gandalf go to Orthanc in the first place? I mean, from the Shire in the Fellowship of the Ring. And from one perspective, it's a weird thing to do. I've convinced Frodo to leave the Shire with the ring. Nothing is more important than keeping the ring and therefore Frodo safe. So I'm going to go off and ride to Orthanc, weeks out of the way. Instead of protecting Frodo, I'll just leave a note with Butterbur. I mean, it's a weird plan. And Gandalf's explanation for that plan is Saruman, right? The message that he sends with Radagast implies that he has figured something out, that he has some weapon, some technique that will enable them to resist the Nine. And Gandalf's like, that would be awfully handy. It's as if Gandalf himself doubts his ability. I mean, if he stayed with Frodo and accompanied Frodo, and the Nine found them, Gandalf seems to doubt whether he could successfully defend Frodo. So it's risky leaving him, but the coming of the Nine makes it the more urgent. And why would he think? Why would he be so willing to believe the message sent through Radagast? That Saruman might have found some way to thwart or resist the Nine? Because Saruman had studied all the arts and ways of Sauron and his servant most deeply. So this is what qualifies him, Saruman. And, of course, Jackie, as you're pointing out, and Gandalf refuses. That also we're not told before. That's not in the main body of the text either. Now, when I say what we're not told before, it's challenging because I'm trying to forget what I know out of the unauthorized Appendix B. Right? I'm trying to forget the published Appendix B, but it's hard because I'm not sure if things that I know just because I've read them there are creeping into my memory here. But exactly, Maureen. The published one is the unauthorized one. Yeah, that's how you know. Yeah. Exactly. Yes, it's the published Appendix B is the mutilated corpse of the authorized version, which Tolkien was eventually coerced into, producing. But yeah, Jackie, I agree. In every way, Gandalf's refusal of the headship of the council seems like a good thing. Not only in a noli episcopari kind of way, I don't wish to be a bishop, right, as the qualification to be. It's a reference to one of Tolkien's letters, that the one most qualified for leadership is probably the one who doesn't want it. But not only in that sense, but also because it's also a good sign in that he doesn't want to be focused on leading and coordinating the White Council. He wants to focus on doing his sleuth work, right? Letter 52. Thank you, Jackie. I'm now, after my latest reread, Jackie, which I have finally finished, I'm now rereading the published Silmarillion, which, by the way, is a trip. Like, every time I reread the published Silmarillion, now I get confused again. Having been spending all this time together reading the history of Middle-earth with you guys. But anyway, yeah. Yeah. Dorward is quoting my descriptions of the unauthorized version. Are you implying that my language is too strong describing the published Appendix B? I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, I love the context here and the position that it puts, the clarity of how it positions Gandalf. Gandalf wasn't just a failed candidate who has graciously agreed to submit to Saruman thereafter. Gandalf felt his own purpose to be elsewhere, right? Doing other things. And of course, it is no coincidence. How does Saruman, inaugurate his time as the head of the White Council? By starting to study the Rings of Power and their uses in history, which we know, and we know where that's going to end, right? So Saruman is like, thank you for making me head of the White Council. I shall immediately start going bad. And it's not really clear when had he already started going bad? Is this just the beginning of something that is being, that sounds like it could be a really useful thing for the head of the White Council to do, or maybe not, right? And maybe he was already thinking of himself and his own power. Jackie, it does seem, as you say, that he's leaving the path of wisdom. Whether he was already kind of peering over the guardrail right before this moment or not, we're not sure. But again, especially when juxtaposed to Gandalf's refusal, it seems very, very obvious which was the right and which was the wrong move to take here. Not just in terms of the electorate, right, as far as their choice of head, but of the two candidates' reactions as well. And by the way, Gandalf's refusal, one last point here, Gandalf's refusal, when we think back to Galadriel's words about her counsels going amiss, if I'm remembering that passage right, in retrospect now, from the point of view of this text, what went amiss is Gandalf's non-cooperation. Right? I mean, if you read this passage backward into Galadriel's words, she's essentially saying like, and Gandalf would have been its leader if I hadn't been thwarted by his own frowardness and stubbornness. Right? I mean, like she had a plan to make Gandalf the head. And one could argue that his refusal just showed how very qualified he was to do that. Thank you. My designs. It wasn't her counsels. Thank you, JJ. I had a sense I wasn't quoting it quite right. It was who first summoned the White Council, and if my designs had not gone amiss, it would have been governed by Gandalf the Grey, and then mayhap things would have gone otherwise. My designs, right. So how did her designs go amiss? Gandalf's refusal. Right, Jackie, it does sound like she couldn't convince Gandalf. Yes. Again, if we read this passage back into that, it's not at all clear that that's what it meant when he wrote it. But reading this back, yes, that's what it now sounds like. And that's really interesting. Okay. More White Council politics. 2850. Gandalf visits Dol Guldur again. Now, here we go. And is our timing right? Yes, it is. Is this 100 years before the previous Thursday of the meeting with Thorin and Bilbo? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Gandalf visits Dol Guldur again to discover the purposes of the sorcerer. He finds there Thrain the dwarf, son of Thror, and receives from him the secret key of Erebor. Thrain had come thither, seeking for one of the 7 rings, but he dies in Dol Guldur. Thrain had come thither, seeking for one of the 7 rings, but he dies in Dol Guldur. What? Sorry, that sentence totally went past me before. Thran came to Dol Guldur seeking one of the... Didn't he come thither bearing one of the 7 rings? Right, Arthur says he didn't look down at his own finger. Oh, there it is! Found it! Huh. Gandalf discovers beyond doubt that the sorcerer is none other than Sauron himself, and that he is gathering again all the rings of power and seeking to learn the fate of the One and the dwelling of Isildur's heirs. I wonder if that's an error. Surely. Can Tolkien mean that? The only way that could be true, that Thran had come to Dol Guldur seeking for one of the 7 rings, would be if Thror's ring was in fact lost in Moria. If Thror had taken his ring to Moria and lost it there when he's killed by Azog, and Thran, seeking for that ring, doesn't find it in Moria, and then is following some other rumor or something. That's a possible version of the story. Yes, like he was planning to steal it back or make a deal or something like that. Yeah, claim it. He was a bit crazed, as we will be told later. Later when? Why do we think this is impossible? Why is this striking me as so weird? Striking me as so weird because it contradicts the story that we know. How do we know that story? We know it from Appendix A, but that's not been written yet, I think. I think the Tale of Durin's Folk is one of the parts that we don't have any evidence has been. It's in the next chapter, of course, so we'll get there. But I don't think it's been written yet. So it's possible that that was a change. Is there anything said in the Council of Elrond? Yes. Gandalf does say in the Council of Elrond, when Glóin admits that Balin's folk went to Moria in part to see if they could find Thror's ring, Gandalf says Thror gave it to Thran, but not Thran to Thorin. It was taken from him with torment at Dol Guldur. So that's already in the story. Okay, so I am right to be shocked. Again, it's hard to keep things straight, right? Trying to figure out, like, when you can't just appeal to everything that you know, but you've got to selectively forget some of what you know, and you're not sure what you're allowed to remember. Okay, yes. So that's in the... So, because the one thing we know for sure that we have to work with, right, that Tolkien is working with from this appendix, is the text of The Lord of the Rings. So Thran's loss of the ring, of his ring, with the fact that Thror gave it to him and that it was taken from him with torment, is in the text. Therefore, this sentence can only be either an error on Tolkien's part, like simply a mistake, like, and the mistake... No, it's not that simple a mistake. It's not just like he put the wrong name down. Thran had come thither seeking for one of the 7 rings, but he dies in Dol Guldur. Can't fix that sentence by replacing Thran with Gandalf, for instance. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So, Adam, that's the other option. Option 1 is that this is a mistake. Option 2 is that it's a revision. Either is possible. It's a little late in the day, I think. Though Christopher's not really certain about the dating of these different drafts and things. So it's a little bit hard to say. Remember earlier on, like, the shirking thing, and like there were lots of places where we were seeing that he was still writing the end of the book while he was working on things like the prologue and the first appendix and stuff like that. He had written those things, but things still seem to be a little bit fluid. Is that still so? Does this suggest that he's revising that idea? Adam, it is conceivable, I suppose, that Thran is coming seeking for an extra one of the 7 rings. I guess we could convince ourselves. Here's Thran, right? He's like, okay, I've got to get Erebor back. But this ring isn't going to enable me to do it. But if I had 2, I could take the dragon. So I'm going to take my ring, and I'm going to find rumors of where there might be one of the other ones. Because, there's 6 more of these floating around somewhere. Right? And not all of them have been consumed by dragons, so there've got to be some. So I wonder where they are. And then he hears some rumor that there's one in Dol Guldur. So he's like, all right, ring number 2, here I come. It's conceivable. So, Adam, the line, it needs gold it needs gold to make gold. No. That's Appendix A. That's definitely Appendix A. So as far as we know, that's not been written yet. We'll see if Christopher gives us any more detail about the dates when we get to that part of Appendix A, but that seems to be later. So I suppose it's possible. Nobody knows yet that the necromancer of Dol Guldur is Sauron. So if Thran, Gandalf is about to discover that and confirm it, but nobody else knows. So if Thran is wanting a second ring of power, that could potentially work. It almost seems to me a little weird. One of the weirdest things to me about that reading, Adam, is that is one. And come thither seeking for one of the... Why not 3 or 2, right? Like, why not all of the rest of the non-dragon consumed rings? I guess if he had heard that there was one of them here. So he's going to get that one. Maybe. Yeah, it is uncertain. He wanted it to become a ring giver. Maybe his plan was to get another ring of power, give it to another dwarf clan on condition that they will join with him to help drive out the dragon or something, or reclaim Moria, or who knows what. I'm just making up stories right now, right? Like, we have no idea. But that is that third option, that Thran does have his ring and is seeking for an additional one of the 7 rings. That reading at least would mean that this sentence would not be a mistake, and that he is not rethinking the earlier account of Thran having the ring and losing it in Dol Guldur. Yeah. It's an interesting idea. It's underexplained in this sentence, if that's the case, right? But I think in the end, that and this is a mistake seem to me more likely than the revision thing. That Tolkien is just saying, yeah, forget it. Thran doesn't have the ring. I don't see any angle in that, or why he would do that. Like what he gains here from making that. Yeah. Mistake makes more sense than revision to me. But I find the idea of the ring greed, right? The greedy desire for wealth and power that the ring was working on him goes so haywire that he's like, what I need is a second ring of power. I mean, it's not that it doesn't work. That's interesting. But back to Gandalf. Gandalf discovers beyond doubt that the sorcerer is none other than... Isn't it interesting it keeps calling him the sorcerer? Not the necromancer? It's like he's having second thoughts about the whole necromancy thing. Which is interesting because, of course, we had Tolkien coming up with the entire theory of how necromancy operated after writing The Lord of the Rings. So clearly he's not just eschewing necromancy as a concept. I think he... What does this tell us? Does this tell us something about the perspective? Again, the authorship of this document again? Do we think sorcerer rather than necromancer might tell us something? Might give us another piece of data on the Gondor versus Rivendell provenance? They seem to call him the necromancer in Rivendell. But that was Elrond's Rivendell. Who knows what the kids in Rivendell, in the Fourth Age are doing these days. Anyway, sorry. Beyond doubt that the sorcerer is none other than Sauron himself, and that he is gathering again all the rings of power and seeking to learn the fate of the One and the dwelling of Isildur's heirs. Gandalf urges the White Council to assail Dol Guldur, but he is overruled by Saruman. For Saruman has begun to lust for power and desires himself to discover the One Ring. So, definite, Saruman 100% off the path by now. Whether he was before he started looking into the rings or was made that way, it's happened. He thinks that it will come to light again, seeking its master, if Sauron is let be for a while. This being the result of his study into the nature of the Rings of Power, presumably. He does not reveal his thought to the council, but feigns that his studies have led him to believe that the ring has been rolled down Anduin and into the deeps of the sea. But Saruman himself keeps a watch upon Anduin and the Gladden Fields, and he fortifies Isengard. Okay. Ready for the revised Hobbit? Here you go. 2940. Thorin Oakenshield the dwarf, son of Thran, son of Thror of Erebor, visits Bilbo in the Shire in the company of Gandalf. Bilbo sets out for Dale with Gandalf and the dwarves. Bilbo meets Smeagol Gollum and becomes possessed of the ring. What a wonderful phrasing that is. But it is not guessed what ring this is. Meeting of the White Council. Saruman, since he now wishes to prevent the sorcerer from reaching the river, agrees to an attack on Dol Guldur. The sorcerer is driven out of Mirkwood. The forest for a time becomes wholesome again, but the sorcerer flees east and returns in secret. Battle of the Five Armies fought in Dale. Thranduil of Mirkwood, the men of Esgaroth, and the dwarves, with the help of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains, defeat a great host of orcs. Bard of Esgaroth slays Smaug the dragon. Thorin Oakenshield dies of wounds. Dayan of the Iron Hills re-enters Erebor and becomes king under the mountain. 2941. Bilbo returns to the Shire with a share of the treasure of Smaug and the ring. So, here's the revised non-children's story version of The Hobbit, right? Let's see. No, wait. They definitely know it's Sauron already by now. Remember, this is 100 years after the second trip to Dol Guldur, so the wise 100% know that this is Sauron. By the way, notice that Tolkien has still never said, what evidence did he see, Gandalf? What did the eyes of Gandalf perceive that he took as, what was the phrase? He discovers beyond doubt that the sorcerer is none other than Sauron himself. How does he know? What does he see? It can't just be his form. This can't just be a visual thing. Right? How do you know he's Sauron? It looks like him, right? Like I don't think that's the way it went down. But think of the point of view again for a moment. This is obviously not written by a Hobbit. Any of the Hobbits. Clearly. James Leaback is wondering if it might have something to do with the power and terror that goes before him. Well, that would suggest he was something else entirely, wouldn't it? Sorry, James, referring to the Balrog description that we're currently discussing in Exploring the Lord of the Rings. He might have heard Sauron monologuing. It's very possible. For some reason, Sharon, that makes me think of Rumpelstiltskin. Right? That's like the fairy tale version of, right, the evil monologue. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm thinking again about the point of view here. Notice how this sticks with very carefully with the sequence of events. Thorin and Bilbo set out. Then the meeting of the White Council. Then the Battle of the Five Armies fought in Dale. I mean, it's this entry is almost like a Gandalf POV, right? This is Gandalf's experience of the Hobbit. He puts together the company, sets out with them. Bilbo finds the ring, but they don't guess what the ring is. Gandalf takes off. Meets with the White Council. Drives the sorcerer out. Hot-foots it back just in time to arrive before the Battle of Five Armies. Thorin Oakenshield dies of wounds. No Hobbit wrote that sentence. Not how Bilbo would have written it, we know. Right. Peter Jackson didn't write it either? Yes. Also true. Astra, I mean, I think that you might be right. I always think these powers have a sort of psychic fingerprint, some perceivable pattern to the way they express their power that is unique. I see Gandalf recognizing this from lore or experience. Astra, I think it's very similar to how Legolas recognizes the Balrog in Moria. Like, it can only be a Balrog, based on all the legends that he has heard. When he perceives the Balrog, he's like, this has to be the Balrog. James is remembering Gandalf saying that he has written Gandalf is here in letters that can be read, all the way to the mouths of Anduin, when he lights a stick on fire, right? So James, as I believe Astro is suggesting, right, that when Gandalf uses his own will, when he does his magic, that it's going to be recognizable to everybody. Gandalf is here. Yeah. That seems very likely. And that's why Sauron feared the eyes of Gandalf before. Jackie, one thing that strikes me about this third paragraph, I would expect a Rivendell narrator to be slightly more interested in what happens with the elves of Mirkwood. It mentions Thranduil by name, unlike the Hobbit, but doesn't say anything. It's not certain, but listen to the momentum of this. At this time Sauron, having gathered fresh power, declares himself and his true name again, and he re-enters Mordor, which the Ringwraiths have prepared for him, and rebuilds Barad-dûr. This had never been wholly destroyed, and its foundations were unmoved, for they were made by the power of the One Ring. But Mithrandir, Gandalf, journeys far and wide to counter the plans of Sauron, and prepares elves and men for war against the Lord of Barad-dûr. Don't you? Hear the tempo of that first sentence. That's what I say. This is not only is this, it's not just snippets of what happened, right? In this year, this thing occurred. And it's not a whole narrative of its own growing out of control. It's just a really fascinatingly balanced and contextualized and rhetorically gorgeous description. This had never been wholly destroyed, and its foundations were unmoved, for they were made by the power of the One Ring. But Mithrandir journeys far and wide to counter the plans of Sauron and to prepare elves and men for war against the Lord of Barad-dûr. Yes, the ands do really drive this forward. Yes, and he re-enters Mordor, which the Ringwraiths had prepared, and rebuilds Barad-dûr. This had never been wholly destroyed, and its foundations were unmoved. Yes. And Mithrandir has a couple ands too, right? Not only far and wide, but counter the plans and prepare elves and men. 2954. Orodruin, Mount Doom, long dormant, bursts into smoke and flame again, and fear falls on Minas Tirith. Get the alliteration in that one? 2956. Aragorn meets Gandalf, and their great friendship begins. Aragorn undertakes great journeys, even far into the east and deep into the south, exploring the purposes of Sauron and all his movements. As an unknown warrior, he fights in the service of Gondor and of Rohan, because of his high race, the noblest among mortal men, his fostering by Elrond, and his learning from Mithrandir, and his many deeds and journeys. He becomes the most hardy of men, both elven-wise and skilled in craft and lore. What a sentence! My goodness! Just waiting to get to the subject of that sentence. Because of his high race, the noblest among mortal men, his fostering by Elrond, and his learning from Mithrandir, and his many deeds and journeys, he becomes, finally. Notice that all of this is technically, all of that was technically the compound object of the preposition because. Because of his high race, his fostering, his learning, and his many deeds and journeys, he becomes the most hardy of men. So good. So good. So now, notice, not only are we hero worshipping Aragorn, but we're deliberately paralleling. In the entry, we're talking about the meeting between Aragorn and Gandalf. It's paralleling Aragorn to Gandalf. Now there is not just one person journeying far and wide to counter the plans of Sauron, as indeed he's been doing for 1,000 years. Now Aragorn, too, is journeying far and wide, exploring the purposes of Sauron and all his movements. Yes, Scott, we have gone very directly into legendary prose mode. And note that there's a kind of irony to it, Scott, right? That is to say, often, the further away from the present day, right, the further back we go into antiquity, the more mythic things get, right? But notice that the Authorized Appendix B is going in the opposite direction. The closer we get to the modern era, the closer we get to the end of the Third Age, the more and more and more it's ratcheting up into mythic mode. (3018). Gandalf visits Frodo and reveals the true nature of the ring that he possesses. Frodo decides to fly from the Shire to Rivendell, but will wait till the autumn, or until Gandalf returns. Saruman the traitor decoys Gandalf and takes him prisoner in Isengard shortly after midsummer. The Ringwraiths appear again. At midsummer, Sauron makes war on Gondor. The Witch King appears again in person as the Black Captain of the hosts of Mordor. The sons of Denethor hold off the attack. Words in a dream bid Denethor to seek for counsel in Imladris, where Isildur's bane shall be revealed, and strength greater than that of Morgul shall be found. Boromir sets out for Imladris from Minas Tirith. Gandalf is aware of the coming of the Ringwraiths, but being imprisoned in Orthanc, cannot send warning or help to Frodo. Frodo leaves the Shire in autumn, but barely escapes the Ringwraiths that in the shape of black riders have come north to hunt for the ring. Assisted by Aragorn, he and his companions reach Rivendell at the end of October. At the same time, Boromir arrives there, and also messengers from Erebor, Glóin, and his son Gimli, and from Thranduil of Mirkwood, his son Legolas. Gandalf escapes from Isengard and reaches Rivendell. A great council is held in the house of Elrond. It is resolved to attempt the destruction of the ring by sending it to the fire of Orodruin in Sauron's despite. Frodo the Halfling accepts the perilous office of ring-bearer. Scott, I was trying to discipline myself, not doing the alliteration in the Aragorn section there. This is really fast. So notice that on the one hand, this is a retelling. I mean, it starts not from chapter 1. It doesn't start from Bilbo's party. It starts from chapter 2. Gandalf visits Frodo and reveals the true nature of the ring, right? And then it goes straight through. But it puts in its chronological place Gandalf's imprisonment, the wars in Gondor, right? The Witch King's reappearance, Denethor's council, right? His decision. Notice the place of prominence that Faramir and Boromir's dream is given here. Gets a big old chunk of this paragraph. Almost as big a chunk as Frodo's journey to Rivendell. In fact, quite as much as the whole rest of Book 1 only gets 2 sentences. Frodo leaves the Shire in autumn, but barely escapes the ring wraiths that in the shape of black riders have come north to hunt for the ring. Assisted by Aragorn, he and his companions reach Rivendell at the end of October. The end. Well, the end of Book 1. Adam, I'm leaning more towards Gondorian source after this paragraph, for sure. For sure. I love this summary. I skipped a bit. As much as I'm tempted, again, I want to do a dramatic reading of this whole appendix someday. But, for now, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields followed, of which the full tale is told elsewhere. The greatest deed of that day was the deed of Éowyn, Éamon's daughter. She, for the love of the king, rode in disguise with the Rohirrim, and was with him when he fell. By her hand the Black Captain, the Lord of the Ringwraiths, the Witch King of Angmar, was destroyed. Even so, the battle would have been lost, but for the coming of Aragorn. In the hour of need, he sailed up Anduin from the south, in the fleet which he captured from the corsairs of Umbar, bringing new strength, and he unfurled the banner of the kings. After taking counsel, the host of the west marches to the Black Gate of Mordor. There it is trapped and surrounded by the forces of Sauron. But in that hour, Frodo the Halfling, with his faithful servant, reached Mount Doom through perils beyond hope and cast the ring into the fire. Then Sauron was unmade, and his power passed away like a cloud, and the Dark Tower fell in utter ruin. This is that Frodo, who was long remembered in the songs of men as Frodo of the Nine Fingers, and renowned as one of the greatest heroes of Gondor. But though often later this was forgotten, he was not a man of Gondor, but a halfling of the Shire. There it is, Jackie. I agree. Gondor confirmed. Right. Yep. Gondor. Exactly. Although this was forgotten. He was not a man of Gondor, but a halfling from the Shire. Yes, JJ, it is interesting that it's Frodo of the Nine Fingers rather than Frodo the Nine-Fingered. And what does that tell us? Why do they call him Frodo of the Nine Fingers? Because it's in the song. Arthur, that's exactly right. The song that was composed and sung at the field of Cormelin is clearly remembered thereafter. So even though when the people are still singing the song of Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom, some of them don't remember that Frodo of the Nine Fingers was a hobbit. But they remember that they still get the title right? They still get the title right. And yes, Emily, that's the most beautiful thing of all, is that the bard who sang Frodo of the song of Frodo and of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom took the title from Sam's request, right? That's what Sam was imagining, that someday somebody would tell the story of Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom. I believe pretty firmly that Gandalf read that desire in Sam's mind. I think that Sam knew that Gandalf knew that Sam wanted that title. And told the bard, like, I don't know what the bard originally called it, but Gandalf was like, hey man, do me a solid or do the Hobbit over there a solid and call it Frodo of the Nine Fingers and the Ring of Doom. Yeah. And that's exactly, Scott, why Sam bursts into tears and says, "Oh, great glory and splendor, and all my wishes have come true." Yes, exactly. Yes. Notice the Frodo the halfling with his faithful servant. It doesn't say alone with his servant, but once again, the non-naming of Sam, just like at the end of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, which, remember, is also being written about this time. Don't you love the whole rhythm of this? I mean, again, this is such a good story. It's such a marvelous summary. I know some people, there will be some complaints made. Somebody was talking about Mary not being mentioned, right? With the death of the Witch King, for instance. Sharon, as you say, Gollum is left out entirely. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of details being left out. And the entire thing focuses on the battle and the host of the West. The perspective is very much from the perspective of the host of the West. That is, obviously, they're, doing justice to Frodo's heroism here, through perils beyond hope, right? However, rather than in the summary telling the story like, then Frodo and Sam laboring across, Gorgoroth, or, it doesn't tell their story. It tells the story of the host of the West, and then the sudden new catastrophic ending, right? Yes, and Halbarad doesn't get any credit for unfurling the banner, Jackie. Exactly. Oh, so good. All right, we're almost done. I'll just finish up. The end. 3021. In the autumn of this year, Elrond, Galadriel, and Mithrandir, the guardians of the Three Rings, rode westward through the Shire to the Grey Havens. With them went, it is said, the halflings Bilbo and Frodo, the ring-bearers. Círdan had made ready a ship for them, and they set sail at evening and passed into the uttermost west. With their passing ended the Third Age, the twilight between the elder days and the afterworld, which then began. And notice how at the end of the appendix, he's returning to the beginning, just so that you remember what he said at the beginning. These were the fading years of this age, and its beginnings little is known, save for the traditions of the realm of Gondor. For 1,000 years and more, the Eldar in Middle-earth, protected by the Three Rings, were content and at peace. In all this time, the things of old were slowly fading, and new things stirring, though few observed the signs. These were the fading years. And now we get more conclusively, now that we're seeing at the end of the description of the Third Age, the entire shape of the Third Age, he now concludes that the Third Age is the twilight between the elder days and the afterworld, which then began. Especially if you don't count the Second Age, whose stories were not allowed to emerge because Tolkien had to fit them into the stupid appendix. Yeah, Arthur, exactly. Like, the Second Age is suddenly chopped liver, basically. Yeah. I don't know whether it's being just omitted or whether it's being kind of considered as part of the elder days, but I don't think so. I don't think so, really. Scott suggests that the writer of this appendix didn't have the rights from the estate to the Second Age, so that's why. Makes sense. All right. Well, I could spend much more time just reading and talking about. I now want to do an exploring the authorized version of Appendix B. If we do get to the appendices in exploring the Lord of the Rings, if I'm spared and somehow enabled to live to the age of 150, I'm totally skipping. I'm not going to do Appendix B. I'm doing this instead. Like, forget it. Published Appendix B is dead to me. So, like, that's what's going to happen. I'm going to come back and we're going to do this sentence by sentence. All right. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Next time we'll see the final chapter on Appendix A, which is the final chapter in the first part of the appendices part of the Peoples of Middle-earth. It's longish. I'll see. Read it for next time. Make sure you're prepared for that for the next time, because I'm going to see how much of it I can do in one class next time. That'll be my goal, to do the whole thing. But we'll see what happens with that. All right, everybody. Thanks very much. And I will see you guys again soon. Thanks now.